Hello and welcome to another episode of the City Journal podcast. I am your host, Rafael Mangual. So excited to be joined by two of my wonderful colleagues. We've got Tal Fortgang, Jim Copland. Jim Copland, who hired me when I joined the Manhattan Institute back in 2015. So he is the one to blame for anything that I do or say that you don't like. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you.
So we are living in interesting times here in New York City, where we are all gathered on this dreary day. We're coming off a mayoral election in which Zohran Mamdani, probably one of the more radical candidates that we've seen run for that office, has emerged victorious. And as New York City's incoming mayors do, Zohran Mamdani made his way to the White House recently to meet with President Trump, perhaps New York City's most famous, now former resident. A man who made his life and career in arguably the greatest city in the world. I certainly would argue that. And it's interesting because Zohran Mamdani has positioned himself very much as an opponent of Donald Trump. He is sort of the antithesis of the MAGA movement, and Donald Trump certainly has not held back on his criticisms of Zohran Mamdani and his ilk. So I think a lot of people were expecting fireworks after that White House meeting. And to everyone's surprise, and I think a lot of people's chagrin, when the two of them came out for their little, media appearance, their joint media effort, they were very friendly. And I think it threw everyone for a loop. So what I want to talk about today is just what we make of that. I mean, I think a lot of people, may suspect that Donald Trump just gets off on living in a way that's incongruous with the broader expectations. And if you look at some of the looks on Zohran Mamdani's face, I think, those moments caught him by surprise too. What do you think was up with that?
I mean, Donald Trump has spent decades dealing with left-wing politicians of all stripes, New York politicians of all stripes, people of all stripes. And so, it's not surprising to me that you'd have a pretty gracious reception there. There's the old adage in politics, there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. And I think that's sort of how Donald Trump views the world politically. I mean, did he want Mamdani to win? No, he made that no secret. But now that Mamdani's the mayor, he's going to meet with him. He's going to be pleasant. It doesn't mean there's not going to be conflict, and we'll talk about some of those, I'm sure. But it wasn't surprising to me because that's generally Donald Trump's style. I mean, we've seen different sorts of meetings. The head of state of Ukraine, for instance. But it's all going to be contextual and all going to depend on that. And if you watch the entire tape of that one, it was not that way necessarily originally either. So, it didn't surprise me. I don't know what you think, Tom.
Trump's reaction didn't surprise me that much, both for the reasons that you just outlined, Jim, and because he will smile back at anyone who smiles at him, right? That's kind of been his
There's
MO.
one thing Zohran Mamdani's got, it's a smile.
It's a smile. It's an ever-present smile. The president also seems to enjoy being disarming in unexpected ways.
Yeah.
And I think he was just kind of rolling with it. I imagine that many of Mamdani's supporters expected him to go in there with the activist energy, that kind of the megaphone on the streets of New York City,
right?
That
he was just speaking into outside of Starbucks.
That's how he made his name.
Right,
he was an activist, and I think many people in the DSA orbit expected him to go in there and tell the president what's what, and instead we got this stalemate of smiles mirroring one back at the other. That disturbs me for reasons, and perhaps surprises me for reasons other than those that the DSA is picking up on, which is, Mamdani is like a relatively unknown entity. Like, what is he really up to?
Right.
If he is not the person the DSA expected him to be, if he is not outwardly as he is inwardly, then what if we've really just gotten a complete unknown in this new situation, right? At least the DSA radical, we know what we're dealing with.
Right. I still
Although if
think
you're
he's
dealing
probably
with,
in that
I mean, if you're
camp.
dealing with someone on a certain edge of the spectrum, might be better than,
Sure,
the known edge, right? So, I mean, listen,
anything unknown is going to be to the right of what I think a lot of people think Zohran Mamdani is, which is a welcome
Mamdani
development.
has gotten elected now, which means he's got to deliver something here.
Right.
Now, I don't think he's going to fundamentally transform his worldview. I think he is who he says he is. But, the federal government plays a big role in a lot of respects for New York City. And
namely funding a lot of what happens
a lot
here.
of stuff. And listen, could he win at the end of the day in legal battles with the feds on a lot of this? Sure. And if you're an attorney general, like my law school classmate Rob Bonta in California, you can make a career out of that. I took on Trump and beat him in court. But if you're the mayor, people want the trash picked up. People want people have certain expectations for what's going to happen in the city. And so, do I think he's going to pick fights with Donald Trump? Yes. But he's probably going to be, and if I were for someone who wants New York to do well, hopefully going to be at least somewhat strategic in those fights.
Right.
And there's no reason to just be personally bellicose.
I guess what I was hoping for was that they would just lock horns immediately, and the story of the Mamdani mayoralty would be struggles with the federal government and maybe some other governments and other authorities stepping in. And instead, I'm now concerned, like, what if he has smiled his way to get Trump into his corner, right? And
I don't think I think the president is less gullible than that. Is my guess.
I think the difference is will service, and sooner rather than later.
I think they're already starting to, and I think one of the things that we've seen just recently over the weekend in New York City is a massive immigration enforcement effort. That started actually the day that Zohran Mamdani made his way down to the White House. President Trump sent Tom Homan up to New York City. And Tom Homan is leading an effort to really address illegal immigration, which has been a massive point of contention between, Camp Mamdani and Camp Trump. And it's gotten pretty out of hand relatively quickly. So, downtown Manhattan, there was a garage over the weekend where ICE had some vehicles. That garage was very quickly blocked by protesters who had planned to try and frustrate those efforts. A very large crowd gathered. Things got out of hand. Arrests were made. And I think it gave us a little preview into what we might expect, particularly on the immigration issue. And maybe we can just talk about that for a little bit, because I think it's important to just outline for folks, like, there are limits to what the federal government can do to coerce a local government to help it, right? It's no secret that New York City is a sanctuary city, which means that it's not going to cooperate with federal efforts on immigration enforcement by and large. And that's good, right? Like, the Constitution offers, through federalism, a protection for state and local authorities to not be commandeered by federal authorities. But that doesn't mean that they can't undertake their own efforts here in New York City. And I think that's where we're going to see some clashes. So, I mean, one question is like, what do you think Mamdani's thinking in terms of, and he's made this promise to protect immigrants in New York, to offer them some blanket of security. Can he really? Is that a promise he can keep? What does that even look like? Right? I mean, let's say, can he, for example, kick ICE out of the city? No, right? I mean, there's federal supremacy.
No, right? I mean, the Constitution is very clear that the federal law is supreme over the state law, as long as the federal law is constitutional. And there can be legal challenges, and there could be legal challenges that ICE would lose. But the federal law is supreme. But the federal government is a government of limited powers.
Sure.
And the states retain under the 10th Amendment residual authority.
Sure.
And the Supreme Court's been clear, you can't commandeer the states. And the president can't force Mamdani to order the NYPD to do X, Y, or Z. But to actually remove federal troops or federal agents, or federal facilities, I mean, listen. We had this dispute before. We had it in 1861. I mean, at the end of the day, the federal law is supreme, and Mamdani is going to face that limit in what he can do.
Right. I mean, this is probably, at least in my version of things, why you didn't really see Donald Trump get flustered during that meeting. I think he knows ultimately that there's very little that Zohran Mamdani can do to stop him from sort of executing on his priorities, particularly on immigration enforcement.
Well, certainly it would take a lot of effort and resources to try.
Right.
And that might be good enough, right? Trump does know, like, I can make your life hell if
Right.
you try to mess with the federal power in any way. I have even more resources than New York City does.
Right. Right. Which is, and it is interesting to sort of think through what that would even look like, right? I mean, obviously, we know that Mamdani can't ban federal agents from, patrolling in New York City or making arrests in New York City. But as we saw this weekend with the protests at the ICE facility or at the garage targeting ICE, the NYPD does need to play a role, right? I mean, the rule can't be that, or maybe it can be that, the allies that Mamdani has in the kind of protests movements of New York City can just go follow ICE around and block traffic and, block their facilities and just get away with that.
I mean, listen, I think Mamdani can order the NYPD to stand down.
Is that a good look for New York City?
I don't think he should, but I think he can. Now, the question is, though, for people who are worried about, Trump calling in National Guard or sending in federal forces in some form, if he does that, that will be the federal response. You have to assume that. I mean, the federal government has to be able to protect its people, its facilities. We saw this in the protests in 2020, right? When you had up in Portland and these sorts of protests happening where federal buildings were under siege. Well, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the federal government's going to protect its facilities, it's going to protect its people. So if the NYPD is not going to do it, the feds will do it.
There's also the threat behind the scenes of the federal government no longer spending money on state and local government and law enforcement. Now, obviously, that's a really blunt instrument to say that, less or no federal money is going to flow to the New York Police Department. The people who suffer under such an escalation are New Yorkers, obviously. But that's a dramatic.
Well, not under Zohran Mamdani's theory of, the world, right? I mean, for him, policing.
This is four-dimensional chess, right?
Yeah.
He's going to force Republicans to defund the police. That's another tool that's available. That's a pretty scary escalation.
Right. But it's clearly one this administration's taken vis-a-vis major research universities, for instance.
Sure.
And there's a reason why a lot of those research universities have backed down. And so, I have to question whether that's the fight that the mayor would want to pick. I mean, unless he's trying to backdoor police defunding, which would be crazy, but it may be what he would want. Who knows?
It might be what he would want. And actually, that's an interesting question to explore for a little bit because, I'm sure that as Team Mamdani is thinking about what they can do to frustrate the efforts of, ICE and CBP, the Customs and Border Protection, the two agencies primarily doing immigration enforcement, the Trump administration is probably also thinking about, well, what can we do to limit the excesses of a Mamdani administration? Which I think is an interesting question to think about, right? I mean, and policing is one of those areas that immediately comes to mind for me, in part because that's my focus, right? But say Mamdani tries to significantly defund the NYPD or follow through on his promises to, get rid of the gang database or, get rid of, significant units of the NYPD. I mean, couldn't the federal government step in there and send, say, a joint task force of federal law enforcement agents to come in and set up their own gang policing shop where, they have concurrent jurisdiction?
Absolutely. I mean, there are statutory limits and constitutional limits. The constitutional limits, are relatively low based on what the Supreme Court's interpreted federal power under the Constitution. The statutory limits may be stricter. There may be things written in the statute that create limits, but the answer is that there's quite a broad scope for federal law enforcement. We see the FBI, we see federal law enforcement in lots and lots of matters, and this is something from the prosecutorial angle and from the police enforcement angle where the feds could certainly step in if Mamdani's not willing to act.
Here's one other thing that obviously relates to many of the hobby horses that I've developed thinking about domestic extremist groups and sort of this activist nonprofit complex. Uh, the mechanism by which uh, under this scenario we've sketched out, the mechanism by which Mamdani you know makes life difficult for immigration enforcement is essentially letting these nonprofit activist organizations run wild, right? Letting them have their way with ICE,
Yeah.
beat them back, stand in their way, interfere, uh, and refuse to call in the police to make arrests and restore order. So we've sketched out the way that the feds can restore order. The feds can also attack the roots of the problem by investigating and otherwise undermining the actual foot soldiers and the organizations that organize them.
What does
Uh,
that look like?
well, there's a lot that can be done there. We've seen some of these Antifa-aligned organizations,
Which has been declared a domestic terrorist organization, right?
to questionable legal effect.
For sure.
But many other partner organizations have soft spots, weaknesses, ties to hostile foreign regimes, ties to foreign terrorist organizations, and a history of lawbreaking, this kind of disorderly conduct that makes up the bread and butter of what they do, vandalism, trespassing, obstruction of justice in
Right.
the case of getting in the way of ICE, all kinds of relatively small crimes when they are done in isolation that can be hugely disruptive when they're done en masse or as part of a repeated pattern of conduct that really obstructs, it really gets
Right.
in the way of the proper functioning of society. Any of those could be a basis for an investigation of these 501c3 groups that fund and organize and otherwise deploy these foot soldiers. There's potentially a lot of money there, not to mention the those who grant money to those organizations, possibly while knowing that money is going to be used for
Well,
unlawful purposes.
that was going to be my next question. I mean, aren't they sort of opening themselves up now to some kind of legal exposure, which could ultimately dissuade them from funding?
I mean, there could certainly be a chilling effect, right? I mean, I think it'd be much harder to bring those sort of second order cases. But there could be a chilling effect. I mean, people of large means aren't going to want to, deal with the
Right.
headaches of winning, I think, in some of these cases. And, the feds statutorily it's the anti-terror stuff. It's RICO, the Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organizations Act. There's lots of federal statutory frameworks.
Sure.
Where you could go after some of these organized entities if they're actually sowing discord. And I wouldn't at all put it past, this administration, this Justice Department from doing exactly that.
It would be nice, by the way, if state governments that also have the authority to
Right.
step in and either enact a punishment that fits this kind of conduct by just raising the penalties on the characteristic unlawful conduct that constitutes these protests, right? Which is a complicated way of saying if it's just a misdemeanor to commit disorderly conduct, states can step in and say, if you commit disorderly conduct with 10 other people or in the course of a certain pattern of behavior, we're going to consider that a felony and we're going to prosecute it as a felony. If you raise the costs, you prevent more people from doing it. It's basic.
Well, then the question becomes, at least in New York City, is like, can you convince someone like Alvin Bragg or Eric Gonzalez to actually prosecute the felony? But you certainly wouldn't have to work very hard, I think, to convince the local U.S. attorneys that, people who are arrested for interfering with federal law enforcement by federal authorities are now open to federal prosecution where there's real teeth, right? They're not just going to be kicked out with a desk appearance ticket and have their case ultimately dismissed for some kind of, out of court diversion program. Here, they might actually go to pretrial detention and face some real time.
If I were a Trump administration that perhaps said that they wanted to go after major left-wing funders of disorder and occasional political violence, I would see this as a massive opening, huge exposure to get to the people who actually sow and encourage this disorder.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of people who are worried about Zohran Mamdani, who, by the way, like he won with a majority of the vote, but there was also about 1 million people who came out to vote against him and his agenda, right? So there's a very split electorate, and I suspect that there is a lot of anxiety about what he's going to do. And like, just to refresh the memories of people watching, like this is a man who has committed to abolishing the NYPD's gang database, to dismantling the strategic response group within the NYPD, which is the group that responds to a lot of these protest gatherings, mass shootings, other large-scale events. He has now appointed a couple of police abolitionists to his transition team, which is very, very concerning. He was the only candidate who said he didn't want to increase the number of NYPD officers, which is currently on a downward trajectory due to attrition. So there are some concerning things just within the public safety space. Then you have all of the socialism stuff. So there's a lot there that I think people are worried about. But it seems to me that President Trump, his administration, has a lot more leverage and a lot more on their menu to frustrate Mamdani than the other way around. Am I wrong about that?
Sure. I mean, no, you're wrong. You're right. Excuse me. I mean,
you almost broke my heart.
No. I mean, what you're saying is absolutely right. I mean, listen. I mean, at the end of the day, Trump cares about New York because it's the biggest city, and he's from here, right? He's a New Yorker. He cares about it, but it's not like New York is the core of his political base, right? So, I mean, he's the issue will be for Trump. Does he want to expend that political capital? And it seems like in a lot of these cities, the answer has been yes, to try to maintain order. I mean, the public safety stuff. Listen, I do think Mamdani is more of a true believer in this, maybe than de Blasio was. I mean, certainly his public positions. I do think there's significant risk. And, I think that's political risk for Mamdani too, whether he realizes it or not. It's one thing to run a campaign with, nice graphics and great social media and an attractive candidate who's friendly and focus on affordability, which is what people care about. It's another thing if public safety deteriorates. And, we saw this when his predecessor, Eric Adams, was elected. Part of the reason he was elected from sort of the right half of the Democratic spectrum was people were worried about the breakdown in public order. Now, we've seen improvement on that over the last 4 years, which is one reason why I think Mamdani wasn't paying a big political price for that. But if it reverses course, if he does some of these extreme things and shootings are going up and just the quality of life things are going down, then he's going to pay a political price for it. But do I think he's going to do some of it? Sure. And the question will be, what exactly will Trump do? But he's got a lot of degrees of freedom to do things.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I don't think that the sort of Mamdaniites have fully considered is the scope of political unpopularity of things like mass scale protests. I mean, you mentioned Eric Adams, who was elected, yes, in the wake of a crime increase and because he was sort of promising to crack down on that. But there was also a massive increase in the number of public protests and riots in New York City in 2020. I mean, the summer of 2020, the summer of love, as it's affectionately known. I mean, I came into Midtown Manhattan on June 1st. Of 2020, and Madison Avenue looked like a war zone. Broken glass, emptied storefronts, not because the storefronts had shut down, but because they were looted, the night before. I walked past, I think, 2 or 3 different coffee shops trying to get a cup of coffee, finally found a Starbucks that was open, but you couldn't tell because they had boarded up the windows that had been smashed out, and inside was, insane. That was really, really unpopular. And if we start to see more of what we're already starting to see, even before Zohran Mamdani takes office, I suspect that, he's looking at a one-term mayoralty, but I may be overstepping.
I think even more than the striking image of a looted storefront or a demonstration featuring masked
Yeah.
protesters chanting unhinged things. Even more than that is the sense uh, of disorder,
Right.
the sense of chaos, the sense of not knowing what tomorrow will bring. Will the Brooklyn Bridge be blocked by
Right.
protesters that the mayor just allows to run free? Like, will it suddenly be open season on CEOs in New York City?
Yeah.
Right, with the groundswell of popular support. Yeah, those things do not actually have to take shape for people to say, you know what, I've had enough,
Right.
right, and take the well-trod Trump path down to Florida. And
Yeah.
that could be enough to precipitate a massive political change.
Public
Right.
safety, the tax base, the fiscal situation, education. We haven't talked about that, but
Neither has he, by the way. Like, that was just
I
something
mean,
that his
he's,
campaign didn't talk about at all.
yeah, and it's interesting because his electorate, based on the data our MI polling and others have shown, is his electorate skews young,
Right.
right? And clearly, as a young person of color in the in vogue
Right,
thing, or a
right.
South Asian person, or a Muslim person, he captured a zeitgeist from a certain type of young person in particular in a certain demographic. But if he starts messing with the schools
Yeah.
and, and we saw this some with de Blasio, you're going to see blowback from populations too that are on the short end of this sort of racial balancing
Right.
test that, he won't be able to go full bore on it without legal fights either. But, messing up schools and messing up opportunities for high achieving parents who want the best for their young people is another way for him to really undercut his support, which is more about feels, really, I think,
Right.
and the affordability thing. But I don't know that there's it's a little bit of a underpants gnomes thing for old South Park fans where, collect underpants, profit, affordability. He wants to make it affordable, but his actual policies aren't going to do that.
Right.
So.
Right.
Ralph, I'm hung up on the line you drew between the Luigi Mangione phenomenon
Yeah.
and the rise of Zohran Mamdani. I think you're right to do that. There is a distinct kind of morality at
Yeah.
play. Jim invoked South Park. I'll invoke Louis C.K. His of course, but maybe.
But maybe.
Right? Like, of course it's wrong to murder a CEO in cold blood, but maybe.
Right.
Right? And similarly, Mamdani's statement after this disgraceful demonstration outside Park East Synagogue is, of course, under the law and everything we believe is good and true, people should not be harassed or obstructed going in and out of a house of worship. But maybe they deserved it because there were some nebulous violations of international law being right. It's a total shift of our moral intuitions to take things that were completely black and white unacceptable. We don't murder people on the street.
Right.
We do not obstruct people going into a synagogue, and just questioning it, just toying with the idea that maybe our things that were properly dogma to us, things that we did not question because they were hard fought and hard won lessons of Western civilization, just undermining it just a little bit.
No, I think that's right. And I do think that is sort of, it's at the root of his rise. There is this kind of counter cultural thing that's actually moving more and more mainstream in a way. But it is a rejection of what Western civilization has kind of stood for. I mean, there are people in his camp who are openly questioning core institutions, like whether we need police and prisons, like whether America is a force for good, like whether this land is, something we have any right to whatsoever, whether, you have a moral obligation or duty to physically impede, enforcement efforts that you don't agree with, no matter how legal or illegal they are. It just seems like, this kind of questioning of things, even on sort of gender ideology, right? I mean, he's says he's going to be a sanctuary city for people who want, for even minors who want to transition, their sort of gender expression. So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things that we are questioning now that we didn't used to, that strike me as kind of at the core of this broader movement. I think the question for us is like, does it stop with Mamdani? Do people end up realizing that it's crazy?
Well,
or
for the non-New Yorkers in the audience, I would suggest that this is the good side of this. I do not think that there is a broad national consensus behind some of these ideas. I mean, New York has always been different, and it's very different now than when I first visited the city 35 years ago and first moved to the city 25 years ago. The demographics are different. The way the city operates is different, and the shifts in and out of the city. It's just a very, very different place. And so, I think with that, you're going to have a different sort of cohort. I do not think the Mamdani message is one that would be nationally successful. And if the national Democrats run with it, they'll do so at their peril. I think it'd be very hard to win. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other blue states that will have analogs, and you already do see in some places sort of analogs or other cities. So it's not going to be unique to New York. But I don't think that there's a national Mamdani movement. I do think within the Democratic Party politics, there's a strong bubbling up, and we've seen it before. We've seen it with AOC. We've seen it with,
who I think a lot of people think is
maybe going to challenge Chuck Schumer, right? The old guard of old guards in terms of New York politics. So
I think she'll run for president before she does that. I mean,
it made more sense to me, but
yeah, I mean, like I just, that's an
how are you going to abolish the Senate when you're in it?
that's certainly one thing. But the other thing is, like, I just don't see why running for Senate changes her profile at all in a meaningful way. Whereas, like, I mean, she already has a massive following. She has name recognition. The Senate, serving in the Senate doesn't really change it unless she just wants to make that a career.
She gets lots of attention now.
Yeah,
raises money. Isn't going to lose in her district.
I think she stays in the House until she's ready to run for president, which I suspect is going to be soon. What do you think?
Is AOC going to run for president?
No, probably. Just I mean more broadly on
more broadly. Here's what I keep thinking about.
You look pensive. That's why I asked.
Well, I have resting pensive face, but for New Yorkers, the good news about this, the Mangione, Mamdani, I don't mean to connect them too closely. Like, obviously, Mamdani's not responsible. Like, I don't want to. Let me be clear that when I say that there's a connection between the two, I mean only in this like radical upending of basic norms of Western civilization. The good news is that this competing set of norms and expectations and a competing morality really is not fit for human consumption. It will fail the same way that all of these other utopian projects to reshape human nature and the way humans can live amongst one another, they flame out terrifically, which means that they are finite, that they will end. The bad news is that they're not fit for human consumption. They're toxic, and a lot of people are going to suffer. And that breaks my heart that like I and we at this table, if we needed to, we could move. We have the means to move. A lot of people are more.
I moved a while back.
We could stop coming in to record our podcasts here in Manhattan. We could record them somewhere from our bunker in North Carolina if we needed to. And a lot of people do not have that luxury. And I am not raising alarms about this really perverse morality because it affects me all that much. It really doesn't. Not on a personal level in terms of my own safety, but there are millions of people who are going to suffer under this, and I don't know what else I can do.
I think that's exactly right, and I think you just made the case for why Trump and his administration should do what they can to keep the excesses of the Mamdani administration at bay. In the wake, especially of Mamdani's victory, I have heard so many people on X and in my life and just, making these snide comments about, well, New York's over, you brought this on yourself. I don't care. And it's like, you know what? Actually, one, New York's not over. It's never over. It's never been over. It's never going to be over. Like, get over yourself. But also, I mean, there are real people who didn't vote for Mamdani, who voted for the other guy, whether it was Cuomo or Curtis Sliwa or whoever. Even Aaron Judge got 11 votes, actually, as a write-in candidate.
Not mine.
But, like there are people who didn't vote for him. There are people who couldn't vote, but are still legal residents who have to live with this, whether, they didn't vote because they are not citizens or they didn't vote because, they're under 18. Those people are no less deserving of good outcomes and good government. Like the idea that we should just, shrug them off and say, you deserved it. This is what it's gross to me. It's never really sat well. But it's also wrong. And so, I think, like I said, you just made the case in my book for why Trump should step in.
Yeah. Who quipped it? Was it Mencken? Democracy's a theory.
That's right.
The voters get what they want, good and hard. So I think some of these quips are tongue in cheek. I hope a little bit. The reality is that foot voting, capital mobility, freedom in our sort of federal system means that with a city, people will move, people will get out, and the pendulums will swing,
right, and
politics will shift, and things will eventually turn around in a positive way. Just like the market is ruthlessly efficient and driving things in a certain direction, that's going to be true, I think, in the longer term to some degree with New York politics. But in the shorter term, there could be a lot of damage. And so I hope and pray for New York that damage will be somewhat mitigated because, we all love this city.
Indeed.
Joe, we all love this city. Manhattanans who's based in this city.
And what's not to love? You and I are going to go grab steaks at Sparks.
I fell in love with this city. I got married in this city.
Come on now. Don't blaspheme.
Aaron Judge can play ball. And, if I'd been in New York, I probably wouldn't have voted for Aaron Judge, but I understand the temptation given who else was on the ballot.
All right. Well, we'll end it with some good news there and some good feels. Thank you so much for watching. Please do not forget to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, ask us a question, shoot us an email, tell us if you liked the episode, tell us if you didn't. We may not listen to the latter. But until next time, you've been watching the City Journal podcast, and we will see you soon.